and we are live with another episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode. This is number 117. I don't know if Ken and I ever thought that we would actually get this far, but this will be our holiday episode for 2020. I think you said it's number 30 for this year, Ken. I can't remember. It was something like that. We're still both a little, I guess, hungover from Midwinter Nights Con, right? You know, after last week and everything that went on with that. This will be a rather low-key episode. We don't have a lot of announcements or anything like that other than happy holidays. Thanks for joining us as always. As we're here, we got a few topics that we wanted to discuss today. And yeah, but outside of that, the videos for Midwinter Nights Con have been cut up and are on our YouTube channel, Absolute AppSec, or yeah, youtube.com/AbsoluteAppSec. So go take a look at those. I think we're going to reprise some of that today and talk about what we liked and what was impressive to us and at least spoke to us from a security perspective for the conference. Yeah, Ken, am I missing anything?
No, I don't think so. Well, just this is the last podcast of the year. So for us, obviously, not for all podcasts.
No, this is it for all podcasts.
Today's it.
This is the end all be all. We're just calling 2020 after this. That's it.
Yeah. No, I still feel very tired from last week's activities. So I don't know that I have not fully recovered yet, I'd say.
Yeah. And I know we had a couple of weeks off, prior to that. I had some life stuff happen and, just been kind of out of it. Right. So it feels good to get back to it this week to actually talk about some security topics. Obviously the big news this last week is SolarWinds. Right. And I at least have to bring it up because, I was at the doctor, just yesterday. And when the doctor asks me about, this hack, it's probably something that we should at least address because it is such a huge issue. Ken, I know you've been reading up on it a little bit. But do you have any thoughts? I pulled up one of the walkthroughs. It looks like it's from TrueSec on the supply chain attack. But what are your thoughts there so far on SolarWinds and what's going on in with general thoughts?
I've only gotten through reading a little bit about it. But when it was originally, I think because I had the same thing, I have friends that are not techies and they kind of look to ask questions of me about these things. And anyways, when they did that, I was like, well, it's probably some config file that points to a server that was overwritten or something simple in the software that was not too difficult to exploit. I see your link there. That's cool. Anyways, so before any details even came out, I was pretty much of the mindset it's probably something fairly simple software security wise. That is, I think it was an exploit of. I'm trying to catch up on the actual issue itself, but wasn't an issue with the updates with the update server. I by the way, when I say I read up on it, I've been reading up more on the secondary bit here about how VMware flaws and the Orion software hack. SolarWinds Orion software. Sorry, I'm very tired. If you can't tell, how the two kind of played together, which was, I think, a little bit more interesting to me, just because they mentioned things like using SAML signing certificates, so using active, basically exploiting the ability to mint tokens, via SAML. With the elevated Active Directory permissions, and then just any service that relied upon those tokens being valid can then further be exploited, right? Because you can mint yourself any access for those mint a token with access to any of those services that are relying upon.
Yeah.
So I thought that was more interesting. But yeah, so like for the initial issue though, it was an issue with the software update, right? Or am I
Well, it was it's a supply chain attack, right? It was, they were able to inject malicious content into the update, and it was signed by Solarwinds, and then it got pushed into that plugin. And that's what that article, like I posted, if you go and dig into the technical background, right, that's exactly what it says. Right. Threat actors.
Yeah. Existing
So,
plugin. So they modified the source of an existing plugin. Oh, and then the plugin was signed as part of the
update. Yeah. And so they were saying it was part of a third party, third party development firm, right? Because they had outsourced their development to, in somewhere in Eastern Europe, right? Like looking to cut costs, and ended up biting them in the butt, right? Realistically, is what happened. Somebody found a way to actually push that in, and then it escalated from there. But that was the initial vector, was a supply chain attack. And I don't know, I sent that to you, I think yesterday, that XKCD, right? That
you did.
I should we should post that too, because that feels very apropos here.
So how did they slip in their update to the plugin?
How'd they slip it in? Well, they were developers for SolarWinds, right? They had the ability to do it. So they created a back door and then pushed that update out, right? It was trusting a third party that they probably should not have.
Well, then Clea's talk seems even more timely.
Yeah. Oh, it does. It does, right? And if you haven't seen that.
Let me link to that, by the way. Clea's talk.
Yeah, link to Clea's talk. That's insider threat, right? But it is definitely a relevant topic, right? I was really impressed with Clea, actually, and we've worked with Clea in the past as she was getting into the industry, and now she's better than us at identifying some of the stuff, right? It's awesome to see and to hear. But
that was fun to watch. But it's interesting how, actually, let me post that XKCD, because for what we're probably going to talk about, it's very timely, because it's like talking about some, in the terms of supply chain attacks, like it's funny how many additional follow-up attack vectors and persistence were used just from this initial exploit. But let me put that in there just because I think it's pretty funny. Yeah. Supply chain attacks are awesome and horrible at the same time, which is, again, just to reiterate, a good reason why you should have asset management, and not just asset management about knowing your URLs and whatnot, but actual versions that you can quickly figure out versions of what versions of whatever is running and where it's running and all that stuff. So you can quickly triage these types of issues. This just underscores the importance of that. But man, I mean, we've seen, you've got like Black Duck, and you've got, SNCC, and you've got these companies that are built around securing libraries that we use, but what could be done in this case? I mean, other than obviously, profiling maybe the behavior of the plugin and saying hey, if it does network communication, like if this didn't make, request outbound, or didn't do, I don't know, since I can't look at the code, it's hard to, I'm sure I can, but I haven't looked at the code. So I don't really know what signatures they could have been looking for, but obviously if there's some simple things you can do, if a library was doing no command line system, if it was doing no system commands before, or it was making no calls out before, and now it is, that's somewhat of an indicator. But what do you think, man? Do you think this seems like a hard problem to solve? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it does, right? I kind of go back to the process. Because I don't think you solve it any other way. Is okay, you've got plugins, you've got a series of code that you're pushing out from a semi-trusted party. Um, but there's got to be checks and balances in place into as far as what that code actually does and whether it matches up with your expectations. And but that I like this is still a really hard problem because I see companies struggle with this all the time, even like internal devs, right? Anytime you have an insider that you trust, that uh, breaking of that trust is going to cause issues, right? It just turns out that this was a very severe issue that got propagated and propagated. So, yeah, I mean, without like some sort of an independent code review on that as it goes out, or like an internal code review, internal like functionality check, some sort of a, watching for negative test cases, that's where it gets difficult, right? Like you throw something like this into your QA, process, and the QA process is just going to run the tests that are associated with it. So if they've tested the backdoor out properly, and they've obfuscated and hidden it, it's going to be very hard to see that it's actually instantiating and something is happening that you do not intend. Most likely it ran through the normal test suite and it said, look, that plugin looks like it's acting like it should be. So they just went ahead and pushed it out and included it in the update, signed it, and went along their merry way. I don't know. Like you're right. That's a difficult problem to solve because you're looking for behavior that's outside your normal test case suite. Like, hey, the plugin should not be reaching out to the internet. But if you're running test suite, on your local system and it's already all blocked up and like has no path out to the internet, you're not going to notice that anything actually happened.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a good point too, is paying attention to, because, we're talking about this at an application security level, but yeah, I mean, obviously there's plenty of network level things that you should be able to do to then detect anomalous behavior. Is that a correct word? I hope I'm using that right. I don't know. I feel brain dead.
Yeah, no, you are right. It's detecting anomalous behavior. It's almost like you've got to create a threat hunting process during your build pipeline, right? Like within your build pipeline to see what's going on, or you've got to validate everything that's going into that, right? Those seem to be the kind of two things that I would be looking for.
It's just not an easy problem to solve, but can I just also say I had no idea Solarwinds were still around. No, I didn't even know it was still around. Man, dude, I got my CCNA in like 2005 or something like that. And like networking life was kind of for me back then. And I remember Solarwinds, and I think I just thought they kind of just went away with time and didn't really know that they. So to me, this is a surprise that Solarwinds still exists. So for what it's worth. Oh, yeah. Also,
when was the last time you actually heard heard about Solarwinds? I was thinking that same thing at one point, right? Like it was, man, yeah, I knew it was still in use, but I didn't realize how prevalent it was. And I think that was probably a surprise for a lot of people in the industry. But you could probably say the same thing for a lot of those older vendors, right? Like if you start talking about Symantec or McAfee, like from back in the day, they still have agents that are running everywhere. And that's old code that's floating around.
Yeah, we did get this one question, by the way. Would a chaos engineering experiment that makes calls to random IP addresses be appropriate here? Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like one way to test your security controls within your build pipeline. That's a good point. You could do that you Yeah, that's interesting. Using chaos engineering to implant fake backdoors to see if your pipeline catches it. That's
Yeah.
an interesting thought.
Or even like signatures. I like, okay, so that again, that goes back to what Aaron spoke about during, Midwinter Nights, right? Like the
Mm.
security chaos engineering is almost what we need there. So within the pipeline, not just, hey, in your cloud environment or within Kubernetes or whatever else, like whatever, hot topic you want to talk about, but throwing that into what's the worst that can happen. And that's what this always goes back to, right? Is from a modeling perspective. And again, okay, what Stefan talked about, like modeling everything out, but have you done a threat model on like using a third party for developing plugins for your software, right? Like when you picked up that firm, did you really think about the true effects of what could happen if a malicious insider is able to insert code? Because it feels like maybe if they had that discussion, they decided it wasn't, but somewhere along the lines, they misclassified the threat that was associated with using that third party, right? Otherwise, they would have put more controls on it. And I know it's kind of a zero-sum game with security. We have a tendency to, focus on whatever the latest and greatest hack was and put more engineering effort towards that. So there'll be a lot more discussion about third-party trust, I'm sure, in the days to come. But
hopefully, sorry, I just wanted to say hopefully there.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did SolarWinds stock go up or down? Right, like that's the question.
Yeah, and it's not a terrible question. It's not an unrealistic question. I mean, yeah, it's definitely so. And I should also add that the people that reached out to me to ask about it, who are non-technical, I think it's an inopportune time for it to happen. Is why I think politically,
yeah.
So they kind of like brought it into the whole, does this affect like fraud with voting since like the government's attacked? And I've heard some pretty interesting theories about it. But the reality is, like, I was like, there are lots of things to be gained through one of these hacks. They happen all the time. This is not it's I hate to just like play it down, but I guess just after a while, how it's hard to be super invested in these things, because other than to get a takeaway of what could be done differently,
Yeah.
I guess at this point it's sort of like, well, this stuff happened. I hate to say it, but it's true. It happens. It's going to continue to happen. Best you can do is try and plan as best as you can around that. Try and use the least privilege sort of security model, so that these things don't get out of hand, which I think that's the more interesting part, is all of the follow-up. Let me post one of the articles about this with Krebs security had put together with around VMware Workspace ONE being compromised through pivoting off of this initial vuln.
Okay.
So it's that. So I think that's just, for me, I think it's like more interesting in terms of just what's possible, what can we do next time to prevent it, and not trying to minimize, just sort of, I'm a little used to this. I think this is the one. I think the SAMLs bit that I had mentioned earlier is interesting as well. Also, I did want to mention, this is totally off subject, but Seth and I will be playing around with our video and trying to get a little fine tuned. So if I'm dark on camera today, I'm fixing it. It's just, we're playing around with new setup. Seth's going to be playing around with his new setup soon. Yep. So we're just trying to,
we're getting super professional. Yeah. And I don't know. This goes back to discussions we had with Jerry Gamblin, right? Like on breaches as well, at what point do you just kind of like, if a breach happened and no one cares, was it really a breach, right? Like, obviously the political climate right now makes for a good news story, and spins up all the conspiracy theories and everything that's currently going on in our in the world landscape right now. But yeah, software is being targeted all the time. I'm with you, right? Like, we've got to learn from it. And that's kind of what I start taking from these things is, all right, I'm doing a threat model on a new application or on a new service, or I'm like looking at some new code. I'm going to be asking more questions now about, third party code as it's coming in, right? It's always been one of those, hey, is it an untrusted source? How do we protect against that? How do we make sure that, backdoors don't get in, all that kind of thing? But there's kind of this renewed effort, and it seems to swing around the spectrum, right? It swings around like security in general, depending on what the latest hack was or what the latest news is that's popped up, where we focus that attention. The hard thing is not being so hyper focused that there's, the whole OSI model and the stack, you have to protect everything from, physical security threats all the way up to like ephemeral ones that we're talking about here, right? And authentication and authorization and OAuth and everything else that goes into it. So it's not a single point, and I expect us to get better at it because of what's gone on in the last week. It's just unfortunate that that's how the industry is, right? I go back to my days at like all the way back, 3 years ago, whatever, like when I worked at, my first job, right? That's where we're at, right, Ken?
Did you say 3 years ago for your first job?
Yep. Yeah, for my first job.
Okay. Cool. I'm also turning 25 this year, so it's amazing.
Yeah, me too, right? Oh man, I'm getting so sidetracked. but the first job that I had related to security was because of basically a security breach that a company got affected by not having a firewall in place, right? And so all of a sudden their upper management decided they needed to focus a little bit more on security, and they opened up, a whole class of, they basically started building a team that would have cycles to go out and manage a firewall and to, protect against attacks and worms and everything else that was out there. And at the time that was just, strict kind of desktop security stuff, but that's where it happens, right? That's where the purse strings actually open up, is when stuff like that happens to an organization, when someone's affected. I fully expect the government to, all these different agencies will attempt to go out and hire more people. Yeah, but I don't feel like there's a ton of people out there to be hired that have that sort of experience. So it goes back to this, like a supply chain of security professionals that we don't really have right now. I mean, industry is larger than it was 3 years ago, but it's still not huge.
Yeah, it's not. And, actually, on that note, I guess that is one thing that's always kind of surprising. It has been surprising in the past when I did like defense contracting for the government, and noticing that the software built for so I'll just give you a concrete example. I looked at there was a mobile app, a person who was developing a mobile app for the government, and they own the company that did it, and they started telling me about how, oh yeah, we've got all these great developers and they cost so little to make this product, and they're located in Russia, essentially. And I was like, who's using this tool? The government. Cool. So I've seen that scenario multiple times. I mean, that's not the first time. And I guess it's just a ticking time bomb, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Anytime you outsource development overseas, this is going to probably make some people upset. I don't know, maybe not, but whatever. I mean, anytime you outsource, it doesn't matter who your country is. Anytime you outsource government software development to a foreign entity, you don't think that introduces some risk? Like, of course it does. That's just common sense. Of course it is. I mean, if you I'd love to be naive and, be like, oh yeah, the world's, all sunshine and rainbows and everybody's trying to do the right thing, but in reality, that's just not the truth, right? So yeah, it's always been a little weird to me that that's been acceptable. So.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we see the same thing here too, right? Like, some of the stuff that came to light with different leaks shows that, our own agencies and, protection is doing things to products as they go out the door, right? Mm-hmm. And so, if you're another country and you're developing here, you're probably putting some safeguards in place to make sure that it's not happening to you as well, right? Like coming from, the US in that case. I don't know, right, man? It's just such a difficult problem to solve because we have this tendency to, we want to develop things as cheaply as possible, which is, right, get the best product for the lowest amount of money. That's kind of, capitalism 101, right?
Right.
But security is one of those things that we tend to lose focus on when features and bottom line comes into play. And yeah, sadly, it's going to bite us in the butt, and we're going to have to learn from it biting us in the butt over and over.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And I don't know if there's really that much else to say on that, right? Like it's just interesting that it plays out like that. I mean, we've talked about the, supply chain attacks in the past. We've talked about some of those libraries that are trusted, pulling libraries in from NPM and other places. But this was just this is a case of it being built into a commercial tool and trusting a third party that ends up in a security issue. Yeah.
No, I think it's you're right. And this is not the first time or last time this is going to happen. So
yeah.
But I just think I think that maybe the timing of it all and the fact that it was big government agencies why it really blew up, and the range of places affected by this, and then the follow-up attacks. What else do we have on our agenda to talk about? I think you had another thing you wanted to mention.
So the other thing that I had pulled up was the OWASP timing attack. There's hold on, let me.
Oh man, what's funny about that, dude? Mm-hmm. It's funny. It's just funny that you mentioned this because it was just last week that I was having a discussion with someone at work, and they were like, timing attacks, because we were talking about secure comparison operators to prevent timing attacks. And so anyone who's listening who doesn't know what that is, secure comparison function, take two separate things, strings usually, and compare them. And then, but a secure comparison will do that in a constant time. So meaning it should always take 3 seconds, we'll say, or 3 milliseconds or 300 milliseconds or whatever to do an operation. Well, that's God, I really can't talk today. Doing that comparison in such a way that there is no time variation. So it's always the same amount of time to do a comparison on strings, regardless of how big the strings are or whatever. That's basically what I'm trying to say. So the topic was how do you weaponize that, and has that been weaponized? And it's just cracked me up because I pulled up John Poulin's 14-minute video on timing attacks.
Yep.
I sent it to him and he was like, yeah. And he was like, oh, I totally forgot about that. I was like, yeah, man, you did great work. It was 14.5-minute video, which means for anybody who doesn't know, who doesn't make videos, that's a couple weeks of work right there. That's really difficult. So he wrote it was really cool. It was neat. Maybe I'll just link to it. Yeah. But yeah, it's it wasn't so much about the tool. It was just proving that it is a viable way to attack an application who is not doing a secure time comparison, and rather is just doing a equal equivalent comparison or something like that, where it's just it's going to have some time skew and variation. How did I get off on that topic?
Oh yeah, well, time gap theory, right? Right. So from OWASP, hold on, where is it? Let me pull that up. There's a site and an application that they've developed to actually test out different timing attacks. I mean, the interesting thing is, right, most of the time we hear about timing attacks, it's because, it's related to, like a bank transfer or something like that, right? Like, hey, you go, transfer some money out and then you spend it or whatever before it happens, right? That's like the easiest way to think about a time gap or a timing attack against an application. But there's so many other ways, like you're saying, Ken, that you can take advantage of it. And there's information you can get back from an application fairly easily because of the way that those time gaps happen. Something as simple as logging into an application and how the developers have implemented like their password hashing and their lookups against the database before they actually like hash the password that's presented to them can give you can tell you whether or not an account actually exists before the error is returned, right? If like depending on the flow of the application, right? If you check for the existence of a user with that specific username first, and then you hash the password afterwards that's provided to you, but you return quickly because an account doesn't exist, but return after a long time because you actually check the password, that's a positive negative response, right? That's a user enumeration attack, but it's based on the timings that are associated with it. And, we're putting up the time gap theory project from OWASP. I haven't been through all the timing attacks that are in there yet, but it looks like a good resource to actually talk through that. I know this is this is one of those questions that I get all the times when we start talking about password hashing and encryption, right? Like how do you actually solve for these sorts of attacks? And it can be difficult. Exactly what you're saying, Ken.
Huh. Yeah. No. Interesting. I'm trying to read through this actually right now.
Yeah, I kind of push that on you, right? Like, but
no, it's not that big of a deal. I'm just more curious about like, where is the goal going? So it says teach you about where this is. Do you want the power to look at an app, user flow, or app design and be able to tell the scenario has room for tactile issues? Okay. So what's the goal here? They're just giving some awareness around these issues and then how to fix it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So time gap theory is just they're talking about time of check, time of use, right? Like when you check something until you use it, right? The time in between those two different checks or those two different actions can be exploited. So that's where race conditions come into play. And I mean, it's easiest to think about it from this business use case. And I don't know, like I said, I haven't played with the app yet, that app code, but it does seem interesting to me. It seems like an area where, further research is probably warranted. Because I go back to the code review stuff. Like, how would we identify this in an application? And actually talk to solving, right?
At first glance, you would think, well, you could just look up any equivalency checks and then see, and then, they're not, if they're not using obviously a secure comparison function, then flag it. But that may not be enough now that I'm thinking it through, just because you may have a database lookup that is super long. You might have just some sort of search that might take a while. Trying to brainstorm some ideas where a simple secure operation or secure comparison function being implemented wouldn't work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the first thing in my head is like, well, just use a secure comparison, but I don't think that that's always the answer. I think that there's definitely some scenarios where you can introduce timing attacks that aren't necessarily going to be fixed by that, or even that not an insecure equivalency function may not even be the issue, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's not the only way that it
Right.
pops up, right? So even though that will eliminate some of those, but again, like it goes back to that time of check, time of use, right? Like even probably some authorization issues around that. Yeah. Anyway, it was just an interesting project to me that they had pushed it that far. Like, I mean, it definitely looks like they've put a bunch of time into developing. Okay, here's some ways that it will manifest. You can learn about them a little easier than just, in the past where we've been, hey, yeah, you've got to be concerned about timing attacks in these specific scenarios. But now there's a resource that you can actually play with some of it to see how it would manifest. So again, like this stuff that John was doing, a few years ago, and his video is great. But there's one more resource there, and somebody's doing some more research into it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a cool project. Which, yeah, that's actually something that's kind of something I want to do next year, is dig into a little bit more of these projects and maybe just demo them on the podcast and, give people some exposure to running them and, what the purpose is, and give some real sort of basically reviews on the software, or project or whatever it might be. Yeah, just because, that's the point of the podcast, is to condense people so people don't have to go do this stuff. They can just hear it from us. So,
yep. Yes. Yep. Well, good. I mean, along those lines, right? I don't know. Now we've only got about 10 minutes left, right? I mean, if you don't want to, if we don't have anything else to cover, like I know we had talked about showing Threat Dragon. It sounds like you've actually had some experience there. And I don't know if you want to dig into that, or if, there's another topic that you want to cover for today.
Yeah, I'm happy to dig into it as soon as I can find it. My computer's running super slow today. So, let me share my screen here. Figure out how to share screen. Man, that was like definitely. Oh wait, hold on. Sorry. Come on, Threat Dragon. Oh, it's not Threat Dragon's fault. It's mine. My computers, I should say. So I've been using this at work while this is booting up, and I'm trying to share it. I've been using this just to give it a feel. So I want to give the real quick, I heard some initial complaints about Threat Dragon, and I was curious what, like, to get for people to expand upon their actual issues, because when I used it for work, I didn't have any problems. In fact, it's probably easier. I've heard people say they use draw.io for diagrams. That's probably easier, I suppose. But yeah, I didn't have any issue drawing Dude, this thing is, by the way, still trying to load up. This is insane. Like, I don't know what is going on with my machine right now. But
it's Electron. Don't worry about it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That was, by the way, Ksenia's Electron talk was super interesting to me, for sure. Just because I live in that world. But anyways, so yeah, I was using this for threat modeling at work, and I had no issues whatsoever. Diagrams were easy to make. And some of the complaints were that it crashed a lot, and the files that you saved your project in were corrupted. Those were the two main, basically bugs, like functional bugs, not necessarily that the software itself isn't valuable. So I continued using it. I probably did around 2 or 3 projects with this that were no. So diagram threat model wise, I probably created 4, but it was actually on like 2 or 3 separate projects. And I didn't have any issue with any of them. My diagrams were of pretty substantial size. And long story short, what happens is, and again, I'll show you here in a moment, but as you create your diagram, one thing that's nice and not nice. So the nice part that as you create your diagram, you can click on something, you can give it some details about like its threats. So you can add a threat to a specific piece of functionality. So for instance, if a system is doing something that crosses a trust boundary, and maybe it does it insecurely, like maybe we'll say it's got communication, it's communicating not over HTTPS or TLS internally, right? And for your organization, maybe that's a threat. Well, you can flag it, put the threat in there. And what's really nice is when you go to export your project, you'll have each of the systems that are potentially vulnerable or have some risk highlighted in red, and then you'll have a list of the issues. The not nice part about it, though, is that when you're anyways, this is the not nice part that other people told me they didn't like, was when you go in and are modifying your diagram, you kind of do have to click on. I think the issue is they said you had to click on the assets to actually be able to see the threats. But I don't know that that's true. That looks like there's a. Well, let me just fire it up because it actually is up now. So let me just show everyone. It'll be easier than talking through it. Let's see here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know for me, right? Like the threat modeling workflow that I have depends, pretty heavily on the, Stride and Dread from Microsoft as far as identifying like the different vulnerabilities and exploits, and then the biggest issue was like how. Well, I mean, step into it. But for me, it was just kind of how prescriptive Threat Dragon was. And so it was hard to take what I currently do and push it into it, right? It requires kind of a rework of my own methodology, which is part of the reason that I didn't end up using it. But that's just me. So,
yeah, I'm not by any means a threat modeling expert, clearly. But I didn't have any issues. And this is, by the way, that was hilarious what Ken Teller wrote. I wanted to hear about other people's problems, but I didn't have any. This thing won't load.
Yeah.
That's funny. But the thing is, like, my computer's just running really slow, so it's not Threat Dragon's fault. So I'm just going to create a completely new threat model here. Just put it on, I don't know, desktop. Seems fine. New model. Cool. So to use it, essentially, you edit your diagram. So I'm going to just give it some information at CK Tricky, at Seth Law. Hello, super cool stuff. All right, so I'll save that. And then I will go back to, oh God, I'm gonna screw this up on air. So I have to go back in and edit and hit a new diagram, and I'll make it a test diagram. Add that, and then save, and then I'll go into my little test diagram here and start messing around. So I like to, what I was doing was creating like these actors would be, for instance, systems. So I would say like, I don't know,
Solarwinds.
And this will be Seth's machine. And we'll put a trust boundary. I don't know. I'm just making crap up. There's oh man, see, I don't know what I'm doing.
It disappeared.
Yeah, I'm not great with that's one thing I think that maybe could use little. It's just, yeah. So you can see it's a little at times tricky to kind of move these bits around. That's really freaking annoying. So yeah, that's another thing too. It's pretty not a big deal, but if you want to like move it around and stuff, you can add these additional points to redirect and all that stuff. So nothing super interesting. If you go to settings, you could just say like, shit. See, this is exactly why people. I swear I don't have these.
I gotta love too that I talked you into doing a live demo.
I know, while I'm super tired.
During the podcast.
I'm sure everybody's just giving me shit too. They're just like, oh, it's so easy. Okay. Oh, okay.
Ken Teller's convinced you're drawing pics in MS Paint. Yep, that's basically what's going on here.
Thanks, bro. Trustee. I don't know. I'm just gonna give it anything. And anyways, the cool thing is like you can kind of say like I don't know, like Ken's evil server. And you can kind of talk about your like what I would do is kind of say like here's a process, right? Like the update process starts. Right. So now we can kind of say, by the way, you can mark things out of scope. You say like this is the update process is firing up, right? And then you just kind of have like a data flow. You can do this however you want. I'm just kind of giving some weird, haggard, half-assed version of how to do this. So I hear beeps, by the way, on Slack or like little chimes. I am sure people are shit talking right now. So thanks a lot. Last time I tried to do anything for you, ingrates. No, I'm kidding.
Nope. Yeah, it's just trolling. Don't worry about it.
I'm sure I deserve it. Yeah, so it's just kind of interesting. You can edit threats now. So I could say like I don't know, edit a threat like not signed update or something, or unsigned. Gosh, I can't use words today. I guess it'd be like repudiation, would you say?
Yeah.
Seems fair. High, I don't know, because everything's high severity. No validation of signatures and completely open to tamper. I'll see now it's falls under tampering. To slipping in malicious updates. Cool. Mitigations. Sign the package. Cool. So now when I go to, I'm going to exit out of this diagram editing. Let's see here if I can remember how to do any of this. So you can save it, like save it state, and then just exit out. And then like it has a nice little PDF you can use. You can also use the print to do the, if you want to print out. But I just want to get the report so I can show kind of what it might look like. So we'll save it on the desktop. And then I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then I will share it again here in a moment. Here we go. All right. And it's really, honestly, it's honestly really that simple. There's not a ton more functionality that I'm not showing. It is what it is. It's a threat modeling, pretty simple piece of software. So anyways, so you've got your report. You can sort of see that there's like a little description here of the threat that I put in there on the highlighted red server or process there. And we put in a trust boundary. We've got a few machines, actors, if you will. So that's that's really simple. Kind of, I don't know if there's anything that else to really show, but yeah, I mean, I used it. I thought it was pretty easy. Didn't have really any problems with it, but
yeah,
I think that you got to get used to the diagramming a little bit of the software, but
yeah, and I mean, it looks like it could be, useful for pushing that out, right? Like, and adding the threats, as long as you understand where that fits in your process. And I know I know for a lot of people, that's what it is, right? They're not quite sure what threat modeling means for them or for their organization. And so like the introduction of a tool before you have some sort of an idea what you want to get out of it is premature, right? And it's not going to solve it for you, right? Like any of the modeling software is not going to solve it for you. Like realistically, it feels like a simplified mind map, what you were just looking at, Ken, as far as, hey, these are the actors, these are the threats that are associated, these are the processes, and generate me a report, and then we can start talking about mitigations and where that actually fits and what we have in place. But if you just want to catalog all the threats, yeah, it looks like it could do the job for you for sure.
Yeah, it's not. It's not man, I can't even type. My computer's going so slow right now. I can't even type in Slack. So my my messages are out of sequence, by the way. I'm responding, trying to respond to chats from like up above, and it's like way below where I meant to originally post. I don't know what's going on, man. Probably a Solarwinds hack.
It's against your server where you're not running Solarwinds.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it is pretty simple, but it's also free and it's not like terrible. So I don't know, man. I draw.io is nice too. I don't know. Do whatever you want. I think it's nice. I think it's all right, and it's cool that somebody puts the time into it. And maybe it'll get even more improved with time. I'm sure it will. Usually, as long as people keep plugging away at open source, it'll get better.
Yep. So. Yep. Well, and that was always that. Like, I mean, the other one that we should look at some point is the Microsoft threat modeling tool. But I don't know how updated that's been over the last couple of years, where it required Windows at one point, and I think it still does. It fell out of favor with a lot of people because it did force that onto, that one restriction. Yeah, but either any way you look at it, you should be doing some sort of a threat model. You should be doing modeling, and you should listen to Stefan's talk on modeling from from the Midwinter Nights Con, because he talks about modeling other things, not just threat, but even like maturity modeling and some other things that you can do to measure where you're at and determine what needs to be done. Any other talks that you wanted to highlight from Midwinter Nights?
There's a lot of talks. I don't know. I think we're wrapping up towards the end here, so I don't need to I think recap too much there. Just an interesting set of talks. They're all up on our playlist, which can you put that on the internet, on the internet, on chat? This is where we're at, by the way, because I don't know, man. This year has just been, since our last podcast of the year. Just 2020 has been an interesting year, I think, to say the least. And man, I'm ready for some time off and some rest. And in the new year, you and I are coming back strong with some new AV setups and some more content. We're gonna get a little bit more in the weeds on some technical bits. And but so Seth put the link up there for our playlist. I think there's a lot of videos on that playlist. It took a while to get all those uploaded, but they are up there, and we'll start promoting them as well on social media, on the social medias that the kids use, the Snapchats.
No, it's just going to be one long TikTok from Ken dancing as he posts different videos to Midwinter Nights Con.
One of them TikToks. Yeah. That's what the kids are using. Zima, hula hoops, and TikTok. That's what they're all about. No, but man, I know you're feeling the same way. And
did you Q4?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Did I what?
Yeah. Were you going to mention why we were off air for a couple of weeks, or it's totally fine if you don't? I just wasn't sure if you wanted to mention it or not.
I was just, it was family stuff going on. My son broke his leg skiing. I know everybody knows I live in Utah and we go, but he broke his leg skiing and had a bunch of complications from that break. I don't want to get into it too much, but basically we spent a good 10 days plus in the hospital due to that, and just crazy set of circumstances. And so
2020, man.
2020. Yeah, exactly. But happy to, have a community around me and people that are supportive and helpful. And wasn't a fun 10 days. That's all I'll say.
Bro, if I took one thing away from that whole thing, was that people really care about you. So that, and your family, that was amazing to see the community. And like, yeah, this is a community, and it was really cool to see how people came together and supported your family and everything.
It was awesome, right? Like I know we've got like a couple different groups. There's Absolute AppSec, and I was pretty quiet on there when things happened. Obviously, we kind of present more of a normal kind of research and podcast perspective, but some of the other kind of hacker groups that we're associated with, the guys were super supportive, or the guys and gals, and kept reaching out. And it's nice to have like people behind you in those situations, because I like midway through that, I was just at the end, right? Like we're talking lack of sleep, we're talking lack of even just self-care was a difficult thing. So yeah, I appreciate it. Love to all you guys that were helping out and have my back. I really appreciate it, right? And I appreciate the community. I appreciate like how we take care of each other. Just thanks. So.
Yeah, man, it was really cool. People really it's cool to see people care and try to make sure that you guys were good. But yeah, I mean, 2020 it's been an interesting year. We can wrap it up and start fresh in the new year. I know we're going to be offline for a couple weeks as we take some rest and hit it really hard in the new year with new speakers, new content, and
and that being said, right, as if you're interested in coming on the podcast and have a research topic that you want to talk about, or a specific topic that you want us to talk about, please join the Slack channel, send it over to us, reach out on the social medias, and let us know. I know we've got some emails from people that are interested in talking about things. I saw one recently, I think from it was the Stackhawk folks. It may be interesting to have somebody come on from them as they're doing dynamic assessment and CI/CD pipelines, right? All that sort of stuff is super interesting to us, and we want that interaction. We want to present things that are interesting to you as well as to us. So please reach out and let us know. That's what we're here for. Cool.
Sweet.
Well, that's a wrap on 2020. Like we said, this is the last podcast for 2020 for everyone. So just ignore everything. Go have happy holidays. And, we'll see everybody online and in the new year.
Peace. Have a good one.
Okay.
Thank you.